Hello. Right. So my presentation is a bit different to the ones previous. I'm not actually going to be talking about making games or tools to make games. I'm actually going to be talking about the process of going through a game jam. Because I don't think anyone's actually said what a game jam is yet, so I'm just going to actually say what it is. It's usually a weekend, a certain amount of time. For ShefJam, you're going to have 30 hours to create a game in. And that actually sounds quite difficult if you think about it. It's just 30 hours, if you've never made a game before, it's a really small amount of time to do something in, so it might be a good idea to have a few tips on how to go about doing it. So my presentation is, I'll do a bit about me first. This is me, that is a cartoon picture of me, with an arrow pointing to me. My name is George, if you couldn't tell from the previous slide, George's Guide to Gamejams. I've been making games for about 8 to 9 years, I think. And I've taken part in a lot of game jams. I actually forget how many, so I'm putting countless there. And I consider myself a professional game jammer amateur because of that. So my presentation is based on this book here. It's called The Game Jam Survival Guide by, I think, Krista Caterler. You might have heard of him. But it basically details, it's like a chronological way of how to go about doing a game jam. So I'm going to be embracing the best practices and techniques set by our forefathers, the people that have done game jams before and have learned all the problems that can occur during a game jam. And I'm going to be telling you how to get the most out of the weekend so you don't go completely mad, and not passing out from lack of nutrition and sleep, which occasionally happens. Like, honestly to God, sleep. And I'm not going to talk about any kind of programming or anything in this, so that can be for later lectures and stuff. Lectures, presentations. So, like I said, I'm going to go through a step-by-step process of the perfect game jam scenario you should be aiming for. So it's going to be chronological. I'm going to begin before the jam, and then we're going to go straight into the start of the jam, and in the middle and towards the end as well. So it's all nice and chronological of what you should be doing during it. So, first thing you should do is know your tools. So we've had a few presentations on this already, like advertising a few different tools, but actually go away and learn some of these if you want to make a decent game during this time. So what language are you using and how do you use it? Have you thought about using a game engine or library, some of the ones I mentioned before? Have you thought about art and sound? Like, we're going to have some stuff on art, and we're not going to do on sound, have we? But if you are a musician, then think about the tools you're going to be using, like FL Studio or Ableton Live or things like that. I like Audacity. And it may sound obvious, but there are lots of people that do try and learn during a jam, which you can do, but you're probably not going to get a very successful game out of doing that. So my advice to this is to make sure you know all of the ins and outs of your tools before you come into the game jam, and actually test these things as well. So make a test game at home perhaps. So draw a few things in paint.net and import them into a game engine and make sure it actually works. Know what file formats you're going to need, make a couple of sounds in Audacity and put them in, just make sure everything works. That was the advice frog, by the way, I don't know if you noticed that. So prepare your project as well. So this is an incredibly good idea, because a lot of people that come to a game jam, they create a new project and they go and click run and it doesn't run. And they're like, why isn't it running? Why is it not running? I need to get going straight away, it's not working. So if you do that at home, if you create a new project at home and then just click a run and make sure it actually runs, you'll be off to a flying start when you actually turn up the game jam. It's such a simple thing to do and people don't do it. So then you can also practice any techniques you're planning on using. So before I start a game jam, I like to have a look at I personally use Hacksflixel, so I have a look through the documentation for Hacksflixel, and I just look at all the new things I've added or things I've never used before and just actually have a go at making things using those kind of techniques and tools that they've provided. So my advice here, I always come to a game jam with two projects. My first one is what I said before. I create a new project at home and make sure it runs, and then I bring that into the game jam. And then I also have another project where all these practices that I've done, little snippets of code there, so I know these work and I can actually use them during the game jam. So also know yourself. This is a bit of a cheesy slide, but it might seem obvious, but a lot of people forget about eating and sleeping and things like that, and that's a really bad idea. Take lots of breaks, make sure you're not going mentally insane, because people, the amount of times I turn to a game jam and just take my earphones off and I hear arguing going on, it's what are you doing? Sleep! It's also a very good idea to communicate with people as well. So there's going to be lots of people around you. If you're not in a team, then you want to get up and you can talk to your people, see what they're working on. I mean, I always work solo, so that's what I do. But it makes it a lot less stressful and more friendly. So, like I just said, I tend to work by myself, so I get up and I walk around and I talk to people during the game jam. And it's a very good way of taking a break because it keeps your mind in the game while you're talking to people, because you're still talking about games and things, but it just helps you like keep this like, I don't know, it's a bit of a difficult. You have a sort of like mindset during a game jam and you don't want to lose that. So by talking about like people's development and your development, you don't lose that and you can get back to your game and you can still work on it pretty well. And they also schedule my sleep as well. I'll come back to that later. Bring everything you need. So you don't just need a laptop, you can bring anything you want. So you can bring like game pads, you can bring like, I don't know, I bring like a microphone, I bring game pads, I bring like all sorts of junk. But you can bring whatever you want. You can bring like VR equipment if you want. It doesn't matter, you can make anything. And it usually makes your games like more interesting and engaging, so if you've got some like silly controller or some silly like input scheme, then people are going to be quite excited by that. So I love to make silly games, so I always bring along anything, absolutely anything. I'm planning on bringing a dance pad this time. That's what I'm going to make my game with, so yeah. I also bring a sketch pad as well, so they're very good for like writing down little ideas and things. Very quickly, I find it easier than typing, so I can just scribble something down or draw a diagram. So yeah, bring one of them. Right, so that's a bunch of stuff before you should start the game jam. We're now moving on to the first 6 hours. So the theme has been announced, and you've all sat down at your table and you're ready to start making your game. Oh, in case you didn't know, at a game jam, a theme is announced right at the beginning, so you can't cheat beforehand. You have to make a game based on a theme, which they announce at the beginning. That's how it starts. So, first thing you should do is brainstorm. Don't launch into coding, that's a terrible idea. So once the theme is announced, take a step back and mull over all of your ideas. Keep your game simple. So, like RPGs, complicated plots, if you're using something like RPG Maker, it's fine, because it's all very built in. You can usually make something quite small and easy with RPG Maker. But usually, if you're using something like a game engine or like a game framework, do not do anything massively complicated, because you will not finish. I guarantee you will not finish. And your first idea is always rubbish as well. If you ever brainstorm stuff, you usually like the first idea you come up with is usually something you probably want to reject because you haven't thought about it enough. Come up with lots and lots of ideas and then pick the best one. So if you're in a team, spend a little longer and make sure everybody has the same idea that you've come up with, because it's very important that in a team you have very good communication and everybody knows exactly what they're making. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, there's going to be some kind of miscommunication somewhere and people are going to make things that they didn't actually want and it's going to go disastrously. So the rule is KISS, which is keep it simple, stupid. When coming up with an idea, keep it as simple as possible. So aim for things like simplistic graphics, simplistic controls, minimal game mechanics, and make sure you do one thing well and not 20 things poorly. Yeah, that's quite self-explanatory, that slide. So my advice, the first thing I do is I grab my sketch pad, I grab my pencil as well to write on the sketch pad, and then I note down all of the ideas that I have. So I usually come up with, I don't know, 3 or 4 ideas, and then I pick the best one, and once I've picked the best one, I then expand upon it. I don't start programming straight away. I make sure I note down everything I'm going to do with that game. So the gameplay, the art, the controls, the design, the story, music, sound, everything like that. All of that I detail on a piece of paper, so I know exactly what I'm going to be making. So once you have a very clear picture in your mind, you can then begin actually making it. So, the most important part of the jam, in my opinion, is the very, very beginning, after you've done the brainstorming. Just start programming straight away. Like art and sound, they come secondary to this, because you are making a game, right? And the only way you're going to be able to make a game is you have to do all the programming and make sure it actually works. So, do all of your programming to begin with, and then I recommend using like basic placeholder stuff. So if you've got like some, I don't know, geometry, like just rectangles and like temporary sprites. If you've ever heard of programming art, this is where that comes in. So just very, very simple things. So this is an example of a game I made during a Ludendari game jam. So my mantra is to have a fully playable game in 5 to 6 hours, and within like a 24-hour period, which is basically what this jam is. It's 30 hours, but I recommend spending 6 of those hours sleeping. You want to have some kind of playable game within 6 hours. So this is the kind of like how small I recommend the game should be. So if you can have something made within 6 hours, that would be brilliant. So the following 2 screenshots are of my game Wakizozo that I made during Ludendari. This one on the left is how it was 6 hours into the jam. You can tell that there's just no graphics there. It's all like rectangles and weird colours, and just, it looks pretty awful. Then the right one is what it looks like by the end of it. But the thing to take away from this is that these play exactly the same. just about. I mean, it was like tweaking further on, but the main gist of the game was there. That worked. It was fully playable. I could play it from start to finish within 6 hours of jam. It just looked like crap. So my advice, try and get all the difficulty programming done at the beginning, because your brain's working at 100%, or mine is anyway. Maybe some people have different functioning brain or whatever. But once this part is over, the jam becomes a lot less stressful for me anyway, because it's like I have a working game, so I can just build off of that now, and it's nice and easy and it's fun. So, and if you're in a team, because I haven't actually mentioned this, if you're in a team, divide your work up. So still focus on the programming, but you can divide your work up so people are working on art, people are working on sound, but just make sure that most of the effort is on programming, I say, and then you can later on shift all the effort to the art and the sound. So yeah, this is the other thing. I'm presuming a lot of you are computer scientists in here, and you have been taught all these beautiful like object-oriented programming techniques and things like that. Forget all that. Your code should be absolute trash with this, because it's a speed programming exercise. You shouldn't be trying to make beautiful looking code in this, because no one's going to see it. So, being recommendations from this book and myself. One large class over many small ones, which sounds terrible, but if you're doing a speed programming thing, it's a lot easier to just write one large thing than trying to figure out how you're going to like divide everything up and how everything interlinks with each other, because you start making errors and problems and things you don't want. And standalone classes as opposed to main dependencies as well, which is similar to the same thing. But this is a speed programming exercise to rebel against conventional wisdom and make the most ugly code you can. So yeah, I usually end up with classes about 1,000 lines long, which is awful, but no one's going to see it, so it doesn't matter. And it's a small caveat I've put in here. If it makes sense to use multiple classes, so I mean the Gamejam, the Game Maker thing earlier, you can have like enemy classes or like player classes and things like that, then do that, because that will make it faster. But if you're just doing it just for the purposes of making nice looking code, then don't bother. There's no point. Right, so that's the programming done. At this point, we're about 6 hours in. All the programming done, you have like a game, so now we're into the thick of it. So at this point, I say time for art. So after 6 hours raw, you can still make a good looking game. So this is a picture of Thomas Was Alone. I don't know if you've ever like seen it or played it or whatever, but it's basically just a bunch of like squares and rectangles and things jumping about, but it looks beautiful. So you can make a really nice looking game without being an artist, if you like stick to like minimalist type stuff, so don't worry about that. So I have a small art showcase here, because I have a slight vendetta against pixel art, because a lot of people tend to do that. There are lots of art styles that you can do in a game jam, you don't have to stick to pixel art. So these are a few of the ones that I've done during a game jam. So the top left there, what I did was like lots of like layered texturing and things, and build things up from simple geometry and then adding textures on. The one to the far right there, that was actually Wakazozo, you saw it earlier, but you can see that it's like black outlines and like flat colours and things like that. That's very simple to do and quickly to draw. I literally just draw a line and fill bucket, that's it. This one here is actually pixel art, but I use quite expressive colours just to make it a bit wacky. And then the bottom right one there is a particularly interesting one. That is a lot of royalty-free images that I just sort of like collaged together, including a picture of my finger, because I thought that'd be fun to like play a character. So there's lots of different art styles you can do, so you don't even have to be able to draw it. You can just like take a bunch of pictures and stick it together and it can still look good. So if you are more like a programming type and you're not too much of an artist, then there are options like procedural generation. So if you want to like, I'd recommend learning this kind of stuff before you come to a jam, but because there are lots of algorithms for it and you probably want to like try and memorise them in some way. But this is very easy to do usually. You can generate quite neat looking art, and it's usually makes things quite fast, because as you can imagine, if you haven't got much time, actually having the computer make art for you is quite useful. So you can learn about that yourself if you want to, and you can learn different techniques. But now we're moving on after the art, so now you're your artist, or not all of it, but most of it is done at this point. So I usually sleep at this point. A lot of people forget about sleeping. Sleeping's very important during a game jam, because you're probably starting to like die a bit after doing all that work, because you don't have too many breaks. So, like everything else so far, I plan my sleep. I try and keep my sleep pattern as normal as possible, so I don't try and like ruin my body or anything. And like genuinely sleep. A lot of people seem to want to do all-nighters, but it's a terrible idea in my opinion. So I actually knock off at about 11 PM, which is quite early for some people maybe, but I get knackered about that time, so I don't resist it. I just go to sleep at 11, and then I sleep for about 5 to 6 hours, which does mean that I get back to the game jam at some ridiculous time in the morning. That doesn't matter. I've had some sleep, and I'm ready to go for like making more of my game. If you're in a team, however, it might be a very good idea to like stagger. So you can have one person sleep and other people still working on the game, and then you can keep taking turns with sleeping, because if you do that, you always have someone working on the game, which can maximise your output. So sleeping's done. So programming's done, art's done, well basically done, sleeping's done. We're now on to the final stretch, so this is about, I don't know, 10 hours left, something like that. This is where you usually start thinking about polish. So your game should look pretty good at this point, because you've got the art and it works in some way. It'll just be lacking like small details that feel like maybe a little clunky, things like that, and obviously you've got no sound of music yet. So probably about like 10 hours left and everything, but this is like the longest part for me. So yeah, if you've ever heard the phrase that's last 10% is the longest, this is where it comes in, because you spend absolutely ages messing about with things, and before you know it, you've got no time left. So if you've made a small game, this is where you get to start really making it shine. So music and sound, so if we've got the musicians here, this is where I recommend doing it. After you've slept and you've got like 10 hours left, so that's plenty of time to make some music and sound and things. So if you plan on composing music and sound yourself and understand how to do it, a common pitfall for game jams is that they don't spend enough time on the sound design. So if you ever look at like some statistics, the people that have done game jams before, a lot of them complain that they didn't have enough time for making music or sound, which is pretty bad because it's quite an important part. So yeah, you probably want to be focusing on that now. So if you've been working in a team, chances are you probably already have some sound and music done because you've been like delegating tasks to people or whatever. So this is a very good time to incorporate that and like work with them to integrate it exactly how they want it. So my advice, I'm not actually a musician, I'm terrible with music, so I actually grab royalty-free music from the web. This does mean that you're not eligible for prizes like music-related or sound-related prizes in the game jam, but that doesn't matter to me. I'm more interested in making a good-looking game, nice playing game, and good sounding game, or whatever. But I do make my own sound effects. So I like to come to a game jam with like a bank of like random Foley noises that I've just recorded with a microphone. They can be anything like bird noises or like me scratching at a table or whatever. And that's very easy to do. You can create like pretty convincing sound effects with that. My favourite thing to do is to make just some ridiculous sound effect with my voice. So I just like some weird noise coming out of my mouth, and I record that, and I synthesize it in a way, and then hide it in the game somewhere. It's surprising how well that works. So, sound, music done. Now probably bug fixing. You've got like a few hours left. So next thing I do is I go through the game, I play test it, I try and fix all the bugs I can that I know. So if you took my earlier advice with it, like you haven't got like massive class hierarchy where you've got things interlinking and things, it's probably quite easy. You can just work your way through the code and just figure out where the bugs are. It's quite easy. You'll know your way through your code at this point, so finding the bugs will be quite easy. And then it's the fun bit. So bug fixing done, your game should be basically finished by now. So you get to spend the rest of the time, however much time you have left, you can polish the game. So I like doing like visual effects and particle effects, so whatever you want. Does the player character move exactly how you want? You can tweak that. Is the game a little too difficult? You start tweaking that at this point. Is the sound effect not sounding quite right? You can go into Audacity or whatever, tweak it and put it back in the game. These are all like small things you can do towards the end. And so my advice, I spend ages tweaking things because I'm a perfectionist. So I like to add things like particle effects, shaders, little bits of scenery, anything like that. I do it all at this point. And then if I have any extra time, which usually I don't, I may throw together like a title screen or instruction screen, but you don't have to do that. You can just explain like instructions and things after when you're presenting to people. So if you're thinking you might not finish, so if this is your first game jam and it's not exactly gone as smoothly as I have been describing, then that's still fine. You can still make it. There's no problems. If it's buggy, you may have heard this before, but find some way to turn your bug into a feature. So it's usually used as a joke, this, but it does actually work sometimes. So if you have some like horrible bug where your character is like, I don't know, teleporting through walls or something, make that into a feature. Just make it into some way that it works with the game. If you haven't got an end game, you can like throw in a timer, like a 60-second timer. Once the timer runs out, that's it, you're done, close the game, show up as gone. If it's not fun, this happens to some of my friends, like one of the game jams I've done, just turn it into a joke game. So what they did is they included like some really stupid sounds and they made like really ridiculous jokes in it, and it sort of hid the fact that it wasn't actually any game there, but it still works. So, and if you don't have any sounds yet, my favourite thing, like I already said, is to grab a microphone and just make sound effects with your voice, or to like tap the table and things like that. It's a very easy way of making like sound effects, and it works beautifully, especially for me. And if you really, 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 really don't think you can finish, so I'd probably just tie it up in some way, to make sure tie up any loose ends, make it at least somewhat cohesive, and just call it finished, to be honest. Because if you don't know what you're doing, that's probably what you want to, like, yeah, just do that. It doesn't really matter. The most important thing is that you have something, you've made something, and it is actually something. Just take pride in the fact that you've made something, basically. So that's basically my presentation. So that'll be your game done at that point. You'll be able to like bask in the glory of a job well done, and you'll be happy, hopefully. So, in summary, if you're doing it solo, because I know a lot of you probably work in teams, but for me, personally, solo. So prepare yourself in advance for the game jam, brainstorm things, and spend the first 6 hours programming, spend the rest of the time on sleep and art, before sleep on art, then sleep, then do music and sound, then polish, polish, polish. If you're in a team, prepare yourself in advance for the game jam weekend. Again, always prepare yourself. Brainstorm a lot, like more than you would solo, so everyone knows what they're doing. Divide the work up, but have a main focus on the programming. Integrate as much of the art possible, because at this point, people have probably done art. Stagger your sleep, so someone's always working on the game, and get music and sound integrated at that point as well. And then you can all work together and make a nice, polished, cohesive game. And that's it. Thank you for listening.